For generations, our culture has operated on a simple equation: obedience to Judeo-Christian rules equals being a good person. The assumption is that this framework provides the ultimate moral compass to guide us through life. But right now, in a massive cultural shift, millions of people are walking away from that compass in record numbers. They are exiting these communities carrying deep, ingrained psychological scars. Former believers report intense panic attacks, depression, and a complete shattering of their personal identity. Psychologists have a clinical term for this condition: religious trauma syndrome, or RTS. It is a diagnosable response to chronic religious indoctrination and the immense stress of breaking away from a controlling community. If these rules are meant to provide peace and moral clarity, we have to ask why the process of living by them, and eventually leaving them, produces clinical symptoms identical to PTSD. The core requirement of monotheistic belief systems is total, unquestioning submission to a higher power. Your personal desires and logic are secondary to divine command. This document outlines the model of an authoritarian religion. It describes a closed system where an individual's worth is entirely subordinated to the group and its rulers. As the text states, criticism is not possible, and blind faith is necessary. The late writer Christopher Hitchens described this framework as a demand to surrender human moral autonomy to a celestial dictator. He argued that it forces a person to desire their own subjugation. Being told you cannot determine right from wrong without divine permission mirrors the psychology of a dictatorship. The subject is convinced they are incapable of basic ethical reasoning without the ruler's constant oversight. Submitting to this dynamic degrades human moral agency. It replaces independent ethical thinking with a system of surveillance and fear, turning rational individuals into terrified subjects. When believers actually sit down and examine the ancient rules they are commanded to revere, they often experience severe cognitive dissonance. The biblical texts contain explicit commands endorsing the practice of slavery, the subjugation of women, and extreme violence against outside groups. These passages are presented as the direct commands of a perfectly good deity. This diagram illustrates the friction at play. Believers have to perform intense mental gymnastics to force their modern empathy to align with ancient dogma, trying to rationalize historical atrocities as acts of divine love. When a person questions these violent commands, their community often frames the doubt itself as a sin. The individual is told their moral intuition is flawed, which isolates them from their peers. Forcing a mind to defend atrocities in the name of faith does not build character. It fractures a person's ethical foundation and breeds deep internal distress. The distress goes beyond reading the texts. It is actively reinforced by how religious institutions enforce their rules. Psychologist Dr. Viviette Allen calls this internal enforcement punitive legalism. Under this system, a person's value is directly tied to achieving total perfection under divine law. Since perfection is impossible, the believer lives in an environment of constant, overwhelming anxiety. This psychological trap starts with a demand for perfection. Because humans are flawed, attempting impossible rules leads to inevitable failure. Failure breeds guilt and self-punishment. Desperate to fix this guilt, the individual recommits to perfection, and the cycle repeats endlessly. This obsession with an impossible standard of purity crowds out genuine personal growth. It replaces healthy moral development with a chronic, demobilizing state of psychological dysfunction. Strict adherence to authoritarian religious rules produces a measurable clinical trauma in the human mind, moving the conversation from theology into the realm of mental health. Stepping out of this ecosystem is a difficult trauma recovery process. It requires an individual to dismantle their entire worldview and rebuild an identity based on personal observation and objective evidence. People successfully rebuild their lives every day. They find robust meaning, ethics, and community through secular, non-coercive means, entirely free from the looming threat of eternal punishment. Choosing to leave authoritarian religion allows a person to reclaim their innate moral compass and make ethical decisions based on human solidarity rather than a fear of punishment.